There's Just Something About Kansas City is brought to you in part by the generosity of our friends at the Cockrell Family Foundation, the Bergman family, and the Sherman Family Foundation. Thank you.
Welcome to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City. We talk about the people, places, and things that make this such a great place to live. And one of our great people that we've been trying to get to sit down with us for a long period of time now, Lindsey Patterson-Smith, the vice chair of the world famous, American Royal, and the American Royal Barbecue and everything that goes on. It's just celebrated 125 years and counting, and just an incredible event here in Kansas City. Yeah. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
How
I'm
are
thrilled
you?
to be here. I am good. Busy time of year, but it is. There's a lot going on. We're at the Royal. We're kind of calming down for the year, though.
Yeah, right.
We had our livestock show. We had our barbecue. We have a really big horse show going on this week. And then that's the last event for the year. So I know the staff down there is ready to hang up the hat for the year. But then we'll start right back up again in January.
Yeah, I was going to say, the boots and spurs won't be down long, will they?
No. We don't get much of a break. It's not that 6-week season that we used to have back in the day. It's a 12-month thing now.
Yeah, it is. It is a big deal, and it is worldwide. You get people from all over the world here.
Absolutely.
And the barbecue competition has gone from, what was it, 15 original back in the day, right?
Yeah,
I think it was
it was about 2015. It was hosted down the West Bottoms and just a fundraiser for the American Royal for the livestock show. So it was a couple of people on the board and supporters and said, let's do this. It'd be fun. Barbecue has roots down in the West Bottoms too.
Yeah.
Like the Kansas City barbecue style really came out of literally the ends and the scraps of what was happening down at the West Bottoms and the livestock trade. And so they brought in the barbecue contest. One of the early smokers I've heard, and I've seen a picture, but I haven't figured out how this works. It was in a old stove. So they took like a discarded appliance from Sears or whatever, and took all the workings out of it, and then Jimmy rigged it to be a smoker. So that was in one of the early barbecue.
Now you see them come in with those things that they're as big as a tractor trailer.
Oh my gosh!
The back end of a tractor trailer, they are, and it's just one giant barbecue, grill, smoke, everything's combined.
Oh, and the RVs that everyone comes in, and I mean, these guys are outfitted. Some of the teams are, but then you go out there and you still see some teams that are just kind of do their little thing, and they do it for fun. And we hand out flags every year at the barbecue for teams that have been there for 15, 20, 25 years, and kind of hit these milestones. I was handing out flags a couple of years ago, and there was a team of. They were all custodians or janitorial staff at, I think, the Ray-Peck School District. And they had been doing it for, I think they were getting a 25-year flag. Wow. And I asked, so where have you guys placed? How far, what's the highest you've placed in this? And no one could tell me because they didn't care.
No,
they didn't care.
They just don't care.
They didn't care they just love doing it every year. They come out and hang out for the weekend and
it's almost like it's almost like it's like cheese tailgate, except it's not every week. Thank goodness for you.
Oh gosh,
it's not every week. But the deal that's what it is because they all sort of park in the same area.
Yeah,
they all get to know those people around them, and it is way more a social event than it is like a competition, even though that is part of it. Right?
Yeah, and what's great about the barbecue and how it's evolved is that there is kind of something for everybody. I mean, there's the big corporate tents that happen, and those are the big parties that kind of happen, and they're not really the competitive teams, but they have big parties on that Friday night. And then there's the Ray-Peck janitors that just kind of go do their thing, and they don't have the big expensive smokers and the big fancy RVs. But then you have there's a circuit of barbecue contests, and you've got some really serious competitors that put a lot of time and effort and money and take it very seriously.
Yeah.
So there's kind of there's things for there's people on all ends of the spectrum of how engaged you are. I always said I I don't want to run a barbecue team. Like, I'll bring the cheesy corn and the brownies. I don't want to be up all night doing the smoking.
Gotcha.
So I've gotten to that point now with my involvement with the Royal, where I can just kind of hang out.
Just
I don't actually have to be up all night.
I can remember
smoking.
way back in the day when I first got here and I heard about this American Royal and all this stuff, and I got to know George Guastello, obviously very early, who's now running Union Station so beautifully. And he was just, I mean, he was
He's the
Mr.
showman.
Welcoming. He is a showman, yeah.
Yep.
He was
Yeah,
a former
he was
stand-up comedian, which we found out
Was
when we
he
were
really?
talking to him. Yeah.
I
we're
didn't know
talking.
that.
I didn't know it either. I said, "You're kidding me." He said, "No." I said, "Now you're running Union Station and you went through the American Royal Barbecue?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, just one thing.
Oh,
to the
man,
other."
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was an old stand-up comedian. But let's talk about the American Royal. Now, I know everybody knows about the barbecue. I
Yeah.
heard about but the American Royal itself, celebrating 125 years. I mean, the history of this is just incredible. And I think the name American Royal, if I'm not mistaken, it was the original name was C.F. Curtis, compared it to the British Royal Agriculture Fair,
Yes,
right?
you're
And he
right.
just said, well, we'll just call it the American Royal. And that was on January 1st, 1901.
Yes.
So
So that was a couple of years after. So the original show, the first ever show, was just Herefords. And it was, I think he was the secretary of the American Hereford Association, which is based here in Kansas City. He went up to an expo up in Omaha and saw kind of what they were doing. And this whole concept of like these livestock shows that we are familiar with today, or if you're familiar with it, if you know, you know. But the idea is that you bring in different breeds and your different stock, and you're like, here's my, Hereford is better than your Hereford because it's, whatever qualities and,
Right.
and components that are attractive at that point. The whole idea is that you create tastier, more efficient animals for human consumption. Fundamentally,
breeding
is
them
what
and,
you breed them. So the idea of like, I don't know, if you're Ford or you're Apple or something like that, and you want to publish want to put out a new model, you get your engineers and your designers and they tinker on it, and then the next year you're like, boom, new model. You can't do that with livestock, right? Like
Right.
it takes time. So you start breeding things together, different qualities together, so you can start getting kind of the best of the best. So the breed associations were around and they were kind of doing that already, but then they're like, you know what, maybe we get everyone together so that we can all see each other. You put a blue ribbon on something, it's going to be more valuable.
Absolutely,
right?
sure.
So you say,
And and the deal is, now they're going to really compete. I want that blue ribbon for our livestock. Yeah.
So this guy came back from Omaha and said, let's go do this with the Herefords. Then Shorthorn came in the following year, another breed association, said, I like what you Hereford guys are doing. I want to be a part of that. Shorthorns came in, and then Galloway the following year, and then it was Angus that fourth year. So within 4 years, it went from just kind of a single breed. Now you've got these four breeds that are all competing together. They're competing amongst each other in different breed, different competitions, but they're also coming together and swapping secrets. It's like it's like Comic-Con, right? Like, it's celebrating the.
And they do dress up too, by the way.
They do. I mean, well, and that's the other thing too is, I think the leaders in Kansas City started seeing this thing. Okay, well, there's a lot of traction here. People are coming in from all over regionally, as far as they can get to, far away as you can in 1900. Coming to Kansas City, but they're not coming alone. They're bringing their wives.
Yeah, sure.
And their wives are shopping.
Because it is you're going to be gone a month.
Oh, yeah.
Travel and then be here and then travel back. No, I can't.
Yeah, with your livestock, right?
Exactly.
Like, I mean, I think it is a massive lift today when you've got F-150s and, air-conditioned trailers. But,
yeah, right. Back then, the dawning of the railroad really sparked the whole thing. I mean, that's what really
it was.
Instead of driving those cattle from Texas they did drive the cattle from Texas to Kansas, and all of a sudden, here's the railroad.
Yeah.
We'll put them all aboard, trek it out west or trek it back east, wherever it has to go.
Yeah. And so, the all these things kind of came together down in the West Bottoms, and the American Royal helped celebrate and kind of put it was something that differentiated Kansas City from other cities that were doing similar things. So Chicago also had a livestock trade, but they didn't have an American Royal at the time. The American Royal was truly the mother of the like modern livestock show. So after a couple of years, it was deemed the American Royal after the British Royal.
Right.
And that name stuck pretty quickly. And then we started adding in other species as well. So now you've got hogs and goats, and mules were huge for a really long time. Different draft horses, so anything that would make farming and agriculture, and basically anything that needed to happen to feed America.
Yes.
It was all, everyone's coming together to talk about it, to celebrate it, to share secrets, to show off, put blue ribbons on things.
Yeah, the interesting part for me is, there was that show that my wife Sarah made me sit down and watch, The Gilded Age.
Oh, love it.
I know. Well, so did I, actually. So she really did make me
great.
sit down and watch. I thought it was terrific.
Yeah, she twisted your arm.
Right. But The Gilded Age for Kansas City, it was the same thing. This wasn't just a bunch of farmers and stuff with, they're just slopping pigs and feeding the cow. This was this was a big deal through the Gilded Age, with all of the most famous families in the country coming here to Kansas City we want to be a part of this, because again, you're feeding America. You're feeding us, and we want to get this out. And I think that's a pretty neat part.
Well, and you're exactly right. And Kansas City had our own Gilded Age eras that had national acclaim, and she was actually featured, or she was not featured, I guess she was mentioned on the show Gilded Age. Yeah,
Lula Longcomb, right?
Lula Longcomb, yes. So Lula Longcomb is the daughter of, what's his name? Of like Longview Farms.
Yes.
So he was a lumber baron.
And she was a terrific equestrian.
Amazing equestrian.
Right.
So she, she was a daddy's girl, right? There was some quote of hers that she said, like, my daddy never declined me a horse that I wanted, and I wanted an awful lot of horses, right? So like he took care of her, but she had an incredibly high work ethic, and she was an incredible equestrian, and her showmanship got national acclaim, and she'd come into the American Royal. She started showing in the second equine show in the American Royal in 1906. Wow. And then she continued on for 50 years. She showed every year for 50 years after that. And every time she'd come into the arena, standing ovation, she had these little chariots and these little lap dogs that would ride in her chariot with her. And so she was fascinating.
She was a character.
Yeah. So her family home is Corinthian House, which is the Kansas City Museum home. And they've got a beautiful exhibit. They have a lot of great artifacts down there. We did a little celebration with them this year in honor of our 125th.
And I really think you can thank the American Royal in some ways to starting to put Kansas City on the map in the United States. I think people sort of knew, that's where we get our beef from or whatever. All of a sudden, the American Royal became this thing, and people came from all over the country to visit Kansas City at that time. And that was very early on. Yeah. It was in the early 1900s, which is just... It's phenomenal, but that's where it really started. Yeah,
you started seeing like you mentioned the railroads, and they started doing promotions where you get cheap tickets, or you can get a rail pass to come in for the American Royal, and it was the Chamber of Commerce in Kansas City and the Stockyards Company who was really kind of the big corporate sponsor of the American Royal for a really long time until they closed in the 90s. So they brought all this attention, but they recognized the economic impact that the American Royal has, that all these people coming in for, and at the time it was really just a 7-day event, but it was huge, and it would kind of take over the city, and then that continued to grow, and the FFA was founded.
You started to bring the youth of America in, future farmers of America, obviously, and which was extremely important to keep the culture going through those generations.
Yeah, there was some legislation that started putting money towards vocational education, and that was the early premise of the FFA. So all these, agrarian, these farmers and ranchers were coming into Kansas City, swap secrets. They're like, what do we need to do for the next generation? And these things are things that are still happening with the American Royal today, right? So, what was happening with the American Royal in 1899 we have more breeds, we have more species, we have more events. I don't think they ever thought that we'd have a massive 450 team barbecue at the Kansas Speedway in 1899. But we're all still here to celebrate food and agriculture, to empower and support the next generation youth of agriculture, because it's pretty important.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yes,
it's something that touches every single one of us, right? And it's all here in Kansas City, and so it's something that personally I'm a little biased, but I think it's one of the things that makes Kansas City really unique. I think it's Kansas City's most unique asset, an authentic asset, because it's not something that you find anywhere else. There's other livestock shows, right? Denver has Texas has them. There's some in Austin, Fort Worth, but they don't all come together in the way that the American Royal does.
No, bringing the youth together too, and they're raising pigs, and they're raising their own little sheep and cattle or whatever they are. Then they get their own blue ribbons or whatever, and I just think it just perpetuates the whole idea and the whole thought.
Oh, it's amazing. I was actually looking up the other day, because there are 4-H chapters in Jackson County. I'm like, how do I get my 9-year-old to develop that same grit and resistance in through an FFA chapter or something, or not FFA, a 4-H chapter. And so, we may, I don't know, I need to do some more research on it, but we may do a project here. We may join that chapter.
Oh, I think you'll probably try to bring them in.
Get some bunnies.
And so while we're talking about the Royal, we know where they are now, but the most exciting thing going forward now is you have a brand new complex. We'll just call it a complex because what is it? 7 football fields. I mean, and everything is climate controlled. Yep. I understand too. So talk a little bit about that and to build out and when we're going to see that. And I know you've already broken ground and things are already going up, and it's going to be an amazing spot.
Yeah, absolutely. So the complex or the campus, and we're still looking for naming rights if anyone's interested. Is out in Wyandotte County. It's kind of cattywampus from the Kansas Speedway,
right?
Which is it's a really amazing space, and it took us a long time to kind of get to that point, to that kind of point on the map,
right? Because you had to find land. Number one, you didn't want it to be too far out.
Yeah.
Okay, which would take away from it, and people would think, I don't want to go way out there. You had to sort of figure out in that 435, area there.
Yeah, and all the development that's coming out there, it really just kind of started making sense. And when we started looking at what the future of the American Royal is, and this has been 15 years in the making. I mean, this was well before my time in the Royal. I mean, probably even before that. I mean, my father and Mariner Kemper were part of those early discussions of what is the next phase of the American Royal? What's the future here? Because it continues to shift, right? It's always there to celebrate food and agriculture, but food and agriculture and the way that we interact with it has changed a lot over the century. And so the American Royal needs to as well. So the idea of what it needed to become, we're kind of capped where we would be in the West Bottoms. Right?
Yeah, right. There was nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go. And so what we're trying to do, or what we are doing out in Wyandotte County, we just didn't have the square footage down in the West Bottoms to be able to do. So we're building 1 million square feet, climate controlled, 1 million square feet, climate controlled events, entertainment, and engagement center, all centered around agriculture. And I say there is a dedicated, what we're calling the Learning and Engagement Center, that will be a more traditional museum and interaction, what you kind of consider or what you think of as a museum. But I say 1 million square feet of learning center because everything out there is all built around learning and engagement. And that's learning at all ages and all stages. That's intentional learning, that's unintentional learning. So there's classrooms, it's intentional learning. You sign up for a meat carving class, or something like that.
Or tied into the local high school curriculums as well.
Exactly, absolutely. There's a podcast studio out there.
There we go.
There you go.
Ben?
There's those kind of more traditional learning centers. But then, like in the barns, you mentioned we've got 7 football fields of barn space. Basically, there's these 5 massive gables that are all interconnected, and so we could put, I think it's 1,500 horse stalls in there, and I think it's 2,300 some cattle, right? So that's a lot of head of cattle. So walk around 1,500 horses and not learn something, like it's just impossible to not do.
Exactly.
But
just to see all the different breeds together and go,
just to see them.
Why is that horse so small? Why is that horse so big?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, these ones are black and these ones are roan. And what does roan mean? And, just different things that if you're curious and you're walking around, it's hard to not
ask
observe
questions.
these things and ask these questions. But then we also have the veterinary space out there has all glass walls. So if an animal is getting checked out by the vet, you could sit there and watch it. Giving birth. There is a birthing. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's things that you may not even want to know
Yeah, right.
in agriculture. But so there's a lot of opportunity for engagement. And then there's the arenas, right? So this is kind of where that showmanship happens. This is where the livestock shows are going to happen. The rodeos are going to happen. This is where the fun, because that's kind of also been the theme for the American Royal throughout the 125 years. It's all around celebrating and having a good time. It's not just a party,
Right.
The barbecue contest. I think it has become a beloved event in Kansas City. It's a party, and it's a great party.
It is a good party.
But it's more than the party, too,
Yeah.
right? So if you come on Friday night, you come for the party. If you come on Saturday morning, you better step out of the way of those hardcore competitors.
You bet. That's when they're all preparing their meat and getting smoked, and they know exactly
They're
how
getting
long
into the
it's
judge's tent. And,
get it to the judge.
So there's both sides of it, too. But, this facility is going to be able to have it all. And that's just what we're doing. But there's adjacent development that is coming up around there that is all kind of centered around this agriculture. So this is where our vision for the epicenter of agriculture really comes in. So there's office space and retail and some housing and just all this development that's happening because the American Royal is going to be there. And it's going to be, if you're in the ag industry, you're going to want to have a presence out here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And see it.
Yeah, because it will be the focal point of everything. And the other part, will the buildings be multi-use, or will they be strictly for agriculture, like a basketball court or a indoor soccer player? Is any of that
Everything
involved?
is multi-use.
Okay,
that is. I mean, these are farmers that design this stuff. Everything is multi-use, and this is a world-class facility, but it is not a high-end facility, right? Like there's no marble anywhere, right? Like it's all concrete.
There's a lot of dirt.
There's a lot of dirt. Yeah, it's going to get dirty, but it's highly functional, and so we built it for our purposes, right? So said, how do we need to run our events that support our mission and help celebrate food and agriculture, but also how many volleyball courts can we get in there? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's a lot. We've done the math.
7 football fields and 1 million square feet, I think. Yeah, you'll squeeze 1 or 2 in.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
So there's a drawing somewhere of how many volleyball courts we can get out there. The arenas, concerts, whatever else. And the phone is ringing off the hook right now, starting to people wanting to book out here, whether they're in the ag industry and it's a breed association that wants to house their conference. That's not one of the American Royal branded events, but we would host them, or a volleyball tournament.
Yeah.
So we're getting calls on all sides.
And this will be 365 days a year.
Yeah.
Event space.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
And 1 million square feet, that's just incredible. I mean, it's got to be, that's got to be more than anywhere else in the country. I mean, it has to be dedicated to, and I know you'll be able to have some other things, but dedicated to this one, to agriculture.
Yeah, there is not another facility like this. Early on in the design process, Cliff was heavily involved on that.
Talking about Cliff Illig now.
Cliff Illig, yeah. So Cliff
we'll talk about Cliff and your dad. And
he was heavily involved on some of the early design stuff with our team, and they went around all over and saw all the best agricultural and events centers out there and kind of picked the best things from each of them and incorporated them into our own. And Multi-Studio is our design partner on it. J.E. Dunn is our contractor. Dimensional Innovations is developing our interactive displays and museum aspects. So it's really a homegrown thing. But
yeah, you might have some neighbors out there too. I'm not sure exactly, but you might have some other neighbors coming out there.
We welcome.
Crack of a bat or
Yep.
thud of a football or something of that nature. We're not sure yet, but
I mean,
we're getting to that point. So it's just there's a lot going on at I-70 and 435.
There is. Well, in Kansas City's grown a lot, and we got to expand our boundaries. Right?
Absolutely,
like, it's all regional. It's all.
Well, everybody wants to live here now. Come on, it's just something about Kansas City.
There is.
Come on, Lindsey. Now, Lindsey Patterson-Smith is a Patterson, and that, of course, is Neal Patterson. We talked about Cliff Illig and Paul Gorup. They founded Cerner, which your stepmom named, by the way.
Yes.
From the Latin. I had 4 years of Latin in high school.
Yeah.
I had to take 4 years of Latin.
It's a lot.
You know what? Amo amas amat is as far as I've ever gotten to Latin, okay? But your mom, or your stepmom, Jean, was just so instrumental in this. She named the company. She was the 7th employee. They called her 007, which I think is just classic. But I think you get your background, and I think the kids, you have the Patterson Family Foundation, which does great things. And again, we're talking agriculture, farming, and people who need help. And you give, you have those. You have that branding there with the Patterson Family Foundation. You just really help those people out with the foundation and giving them grants. And you hand out over 600 a year grants, I think, right in that area somewhere. But I think you picked up all of that from your mom and dad, and your mom or your stepmom and your dad as well. Your dad born in tiny Anthony, Kansas.
Yes.
I had to look up Anthony, Kansas.
I know. You've done your research.
It's right on the Oklahoma border there somewhere.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was a city down there. But your dad's dad, I think, your grandpa, I think it was, they used the phrase was last round after sundown, right? We're going to do one more round of the farm. They're bringing in crops. And the sun's down. We're going to go around one more time. We're going to get one more crop into the barn before we call it a night. Grew up with no indoor plumbing, or they had a propane heater. I mean, your dad came from this a tough, hard scrabble area. You know what I mean? They lost their crop one year, and it was all their money was gone. I mean, your dad really, picked himself up from the bootstraps and achieved the things he achieved with Cerner, the Cerner Corporation, with Cliff Illig and Paul Gorup. The three of them were just fantastic people. Yeah. Really good people.
Yeah. Well, and I think, he grew up a not an easy suburban life, right?
No.
He was working on the farm, and, stories of him, my granddad tell him, go jump in that vat of whatever chemicals to go spray, or something dropped in there. I don't know. There's just amazing stories.
Before there was an EPA.
Before there was an EPA. This is the 50s. So, in agricultural times, but, he also grew up with that strong work ethic that he learned on the farm, and obviously carried that with him throughout his life. But at some point, when he came in and started building his personal and professional success, I think he did some reflection on what is different about how I operate versus how somebody else operates. And he was able to tie it back to growing up on that farm, which is why I want my kids to join a 4-H chapter, right?
Yeah,
because they grew up in Brookside and they don't have that opportunity, right? They have a lot of opportunity, but that's not one of them. And so, he was kind of notorious, and he talked about him a lot, about these agrarian values and what those really mean. And if he knew that you grew up on a working farm, he immediately knew what that meant about you. So
he probably hired you on the spot if he found it out and you were applying for a job, right?
I think he often did. I mean, if it was between two people and one of them worked on a growing farm or grew up on a working farm, then you're going to get the tip of the hat because of what that work ethic means. But he also grew up with his parents, who were not college educated, believed strongly in education and what that meant for them, and saw that as their opportunity to get, to level up. And so they put that as a priority, and all three of those Patterson boys went to college. They went to OSU. He actually grew up there. Anthony's on the Kansas side. There's a even smaller town on the Oklahoma side, Manchester, Oklahoma. And we still have our family homestead there. So,
oh wow,
that's where Thanksgiving is going to be hosted next week. So,
oh gosh, I'll bet that's amazing.
Yeah, and my cousin, my uncle are farming down there. My cousin's the 5th generation Patterson farming on there.
That's phenomenal in this day and age.
It really is.
Someone would want to keep that. A lot of them, they'll get to the kid, like great-granddad did it, granddad did it, dad sort of did it, went to college, decided, I don't want to bale the hay anymore, and then the kids get it and go, well, we don't want to do this. They sell it.
Yeah.
And then it's gone.
Which is something that worries us at the Patterson Family Foundation. I mean, because then you start getting kind of bigger and bigger farm consolidation once that wealth leaves that community, because it's not being sold to someone else locally too. That's
you worry
the real
about
concern.
where it's being sold to. A lot being sold to China, being sold to foreign countries.
Yeah, or even just not keeping that wealth in the community. And as we're on this, big cliff of this wealth transfer, it's something that we're concerned about at the foundation. And one of the ways that we're working with them is to approaching this problem is working with community foundations in these local communities to kind of help support this flywheel of philanthropy of if you know that there's a strong vehicle for you to put your wealth and that is going to stay in that community and help support that community, then you're more likely to do it. And if you start seeing it, then the more things that happen with it, the more people are putting into it. So we believe community foundations are important for the future longevity of these communities. But yeah, Neal believes strongly in these agrarian values, grew up in an agrarian community, and continued to go back there throughout his life. So even while he's up here building Cerner with Cliff and Paul, he would still always go back for harvest every year.
Yeah.
We always do Thanksgiving down there, and a couple other times a year that he would make a point to get back into that community, and he'd go sit at the drugstore that has like a old school soda fountain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the guys, all the farmers are sitting there eating breakfast at 6 a.m. in the morning.
He just kind of posts there, and everybody walks by, and they tell him what's going on in the community and where there's challenges and how he can help. And, so he kind of did that for years. And then when he knew that he was going to leave his estate to the foundation, he knew that was the plan for it. Didn't necessarily know exactly how the foundation was going to work, and kind of unfortunately ran out of time to kind of figure that out. But when there's myself and my three other siblings.
Your siblings,
Yeah, so we're the board of directors, and kind of got handed this thing, and he's like,
here you do it.
Here you do it, and which was
huge
his privilege,
and that was his business style too, for all practical purposes. Okay, because Cliff Illig would always say, he'd fly off the handle and go, get it done, and he'd walk out of the room.
You got this.
Yeah, you guys have it.
Yeah,
no problem. But he always said as well. He always said, create value and good things will happen, and I think that's the way he did it, and not in re-engaging with those communities like that all the time, and going down and listening to him himself.
Yes.
Pass that on to you and your siblings as well to continue on with this foundation and how important it really is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because he could have turned it over to somebody else. Because you said, I'll have this businessman or that businessman. And it wouldn't have been run the exact same way.
Well, he'd always challenge him to solve the real problem and think bigger than they're thinking too. And it's a challenge, I think, in any at-need community, right? You're kind of just looking for the next paycheck.
Yes.
But you really need to actually solve the problem. So at one point, the Anthony, I think it was the Anthony Hospital, was trying to raise some money for their new emergency room waiting room.
Which in a small town like that, to even have a hospital is phenomenal. You wouldn't have to go 100 miles here to go to a hospital.
Yeah, so there was a community access hospital down there that was failing because there was another community access hospital 14 miles down the road. And so these two hospitals are competing against each other, and the towns they're like Hatfield and McCoy's. There's this like old story about literally
There's none of that going on. Come on.
In like the 1800s, like someone rode their horses down and stole the actual county seat, like the certificate, out of the safe and took it. Anyway, so there's these like
that's a story for another time. That's a good story.
It's an amazing story. There's these generational divide between these two communities, and they both had a hospital, and so they each wanted to win, but they both can't win in a community with declining population. And so they came to Neal and they're like, okay, the way that we're going to win is we're going to have a fancier emergency room, waiting room. And so we're raising $5 million, I think, at the time to do this. And he's like, no, I'm not going to give you $5 million for the hospital, but I will help you figure out how to future-proof healthcare in the Harper County community that includes both towns.
You just said Harper County? Mm-hmm. Harper County PTA? Is that what we're talking about here? Remember the song?
No.
Remember Harper? You don't remember the Harper County PTA song?
No.
Oh gosh,
I should know about that one.
Yeah, I forget. Oh gosh, yeah. The Harper County. Never mind. Okay, I'm not going to sing it. But you got to look that up on the way home.
I will.
You'll take you right back to Harper County. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to disrupt your train of thought.
So he's like, I'm not going to do your emergency room because that's not really solving the problem. You need to think bigger and you need to dig deeper. And so some work through Cerner, he kind of empowered a team at Cerner to go help these communities pull a feasibility study together. And so he said, okay, I'll hire the consultant to do the feasibility study. How do you future-proof healthcare in this community? Well, and the solution that the community ended up going with, which that's glazing over a lot of work because there was petitions and these two boards had to come together and create an interim board. And again, these communities do not like each other, right? So, but they came together and they said that we need to consolidate our hospital districts, our two taxing districts, and we need to become one district, which again means one district's actually absolving or like taking over the other one. So that
got to watch how you name it.
Yeah, it feels icky to the local community. So it was a 3-year process to get this petition done.
To do something that was going to be for the common good.
It's so logical, right? But there's so much emotion and people and culture and stuff tied up into it. And so, there's a team at Cerner kind of helping them along, but it really was a community-led effort. And that was very intentional because if it was Cerner coming in and saying this is what you need to do, it wasn't that petition was never going to pass. It really had to be this local community, and there was a key player in this in getting this done. So she lived in one town and was a school teacher, like a career school teacher, retired at the time, from the other town. So she knew all the kids, right? So she knew all the kids from the other town, and then she could go to the grocery store in one town. She knew everyone. So everybody trusted her. And so she really was a key part of that, of pulling all that together. So they consolidated the districts, and then Neal wrote a big check and helped build a brand new facility.
Right.
So on the road in between these two towns is now the Patterson Health Center. It happens to be right next to the high school that, in my time growing up and going down to this community, it was always referred to as the new high school. Everyone's like, well, that's a new high school. And I found out through this hospital project, my uncle was the first graduating class of this new high school. So it was in 1975 or something like that.
Cornerstone had,
so change is hard in rural communities.
Sure it is.
And memories are long, right? Yeah. And so that new high school. And so now we have the new hospital next to the new high school, and it's going great. It's really fantastic. There's you really see it is pulling these two communities together, and it was designed in a way. It's still a community access hospital, but it's has less a focus on inpatient beds and more focus on what that community actually needs. They're 45 minutes away from Wichita. They're going to get their shoulder replaced in Wichita. Their Achilles, replaced.
Don't talk about Achilles tendon right now.
They're going to get that done in Wichita, but they need to come back and have their PT done locally.
Yes, right. So the rehab has to be done there.
So it's a different service model.
Sure. But I think the great thing here, and we'll bring this back here to the Kansas City area, he never lost his sense of home.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's still there now. It's the Patterson Hospital there.
Yeah.
Okay. And so he's never lost that sense of little Anthony in Manchester across the border from another or the other town down the street. He's never lost that. And so when he came here and built what they built, okay, he and Cliff and Paul built with Cerner, he has never forgotten this area either, obviously, since you have the Patterson Family Foundation doing it through agriculture or whatever and people in need. What do you base your grants on today with, people coming to you saying, hey, this is our problem. Here's why we need $1 million, $500,000, this is why we need $50,000, whatever it may be. How do you base that?
That's a great question. And it's been an evolving process because, again, Neal knew that he valued agricultural communities. He knew he valued education. We obviously value healthcare in our family. But he also knew that if you're going to do anything well, you have to have some focus. And those three areas are way too broad.
Yeah, right.
So, early on after Neal and Jean passed, we did a little study of just what's going on in the charitable philanthropy world of healthcare and education in rural communities, and pretty quickly found out that there's a massive gap of philanthropic spend in rural communities. And so there's a huge need. And while there's plenty of things to go work on in healthcare and education, there's also a lot of players in that world. And one of our kind of family's ethos that came from Neal and Jean is like, you fill that gap. Like you do something that others can't or won't go do. And so we see that rural community is a big opportunity. And so we pull, for our grant making, we knew that if we are going to work in rural communities, we need to develop some trust. We can't be the Kansas City
Bigfoot. Come in and
we're not going to tell these communities what they need to do. We don't know what they need to do. They know what they need to do. Thing that Neal often said was trust your farmer. People closest to the problem know the solution.
Sure.
If you don't, and you trust your farmer, and if you don't like what he's doing, you need to get a new farmer, right, or something. But those people in the community are probably the ones that know really what they need to do, and you need to challenge them to think bigger, like the emergency room. What you don't need is that. What you do need is this. But you do need to listen to that community and help them hone what the solution may be. But we also know that the challenges in rural communities are incredibly interconnected. We can't just go focus on healthcare. Right. We can't just go focus on education. They're all one and the same, and they all need to kind of rise together. But how do you go do that, right? So the last several years, we've been focused a lot on this of like, where do we go put that investment that it's going to make the biggest bang for the buck.
Right.
We first need to understand the challenges and understand these communities and kind of build a little bit of a reputation in the communities as well. So we've been doing that through a good amount of kind of open call grant making. But then we're now moving into more strategic programming. Right. So we say,
focusing more now, right?
We're starting to, which is all kind of the plan. It's if you think of like spiral. We're honing in on what we really need to go do. So we have strategic programs around workforce development, community foundations, healthcare, access to healthcare, specifically the hospital closure crisis, and childcare is a big one.
Yeah.
Right. So, and those community foundations, and then we still do some open call responsive grant making. But because we do think that it's important to continue to listen, we don't know what we don't know. And if we find out that, children with special needs, there's no access for facilities in rural communities. That's something we didn't have on our horizon, but now we did. A legal lawyer shortage in rural communities.
Oh, yeah.
Is something
doctor shortage.
We knew about the doctor shortage, right? Like So doctor shortage is something, but through just some listening and outreach, we started understanding that there's a massive lawyer shortage, which is a problem if there's one lawyer in town and you get conflicted out because he already represented you or brought a case against you. You got a conflict of interest, and now you can't get represented. So, I don't know. So that's a little bit how we're approaching our grant making now. We're pulling it into more strategic programs, a lot more focus. That's all shifting right now too. We have a new leader in our foundation, Maria Flynn, which we're thrilled to have her on board, and she's bringing her incredible entrepreneurial problem solving, and she's a farm girl. She came from a working farm in Hays, Kansas. So we're like, she gets that, tip of the hat. So that's all. We're continuing to hone that process. So it'll change it every year.
Yeah, and the other thing for me, and of course the name of this podcast is Just Something About Kansas City. You and the kids, you and your siblings, once mom and dad were gone, you could have gone anywhere you wanted. I mean, you could have gone and basically left town, whatever, moved or did whatever, but you stayed.
Yeah.
And obviously, your dad loved it here, obviously, and knows what home means. What was it for you guys? Did you say, you know what, this ain't such a bad place after all?
Man, I mean, I've got roots here, right? Like, I'm not going anywhere. Outside of college, I've never not lived in 64113. Like, I'm Brookside
Same
born.
zip.
Same zip. Like, I mean, within like 2 square miles, right? So, I'm Brookside born and bred, and I love it, and I love being able to raise my family here. It's something that I think is a really, truly a privilege to be able to live where you want to live, but you still have the things that you need, right? Like, we still have clean water and mostly safe roads, right?
Yeah.
Like, they did some
Except
good
for the
work.
potholes.
They did good work a couple of years ago on it, but it's a work in progress. But I can choose that. I've got all these things that I need to be able to raise my family. There's a Target and grocery stores and, access to all these things. But I can also still be near my family,
Yes.
like our extended family. We've got all our in-laws, and my mother and stepfather are all still, and my siblings are all still within a 2-mile radius.
And what is it for you about this town? What has it been? Because I know you've been many other places, both nationally or internationally, but, when you come back home, what is it about Kansas City?
I don't know. There's an authenticity about Kansas City, right? So it has all the culture that you need, right? Like, if you want to go have nice dinners, or if you want to go have barbecue dinners, you've got a spectrum. You've got plenty of options on both ends. You can go to Kaufman and see the ballet, but then you can go to a livestock show and see,
Royal.
So being able to kind of have both of those things. And then also being in the middle of the country, I think is great. We have a family farm that's a little outside of Kansas City. And so it's beautiful to be able to go out there and feel connected to the country.
And yet still feel away.
And like, we could still make it back in time for a soccer game.
Sure.
So, and that's not something you're going to get a lot of places, right? And to be in the middle, I live in kind of the center of the city, and I can get anywhere in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
If it's more than 10 minutes, and I feel like I'm got to pack a lunch. But,
if it's more than 10 minutes, you're probably going to the airport.
Yeah, it's a road trip. But it's more than that. It's the people. Mm-hmm. It's the communities that are here. And some of that is just because I grew up here, and it's the people I know. But they really, it's, I don't know, you go to another city and there's something missing out of that just kind of gentleness and kindness of people.
Yeah, and I think it fits right into the profile of the Patterson family anyway. With Kansas City, it's one of the most charitable giving cities in the entire country.
It is.
And always has been, right at the top. And it all just flowed right to that with you and the Patterson Family Foundation.
Well, and one of the reasons why it's one of the most charitable is because there's a lot of entrepreneurs here, right? Mm-hmm. So like there's the number of businesses and powerhouse of individuals who created something out of nothing, have that like kind of grit and resilience, right. And what's with the spirit of Kansas City, right? Like, you go rebuild. Going back to the American Royal, the number of times that American Royals had to literally rebuild its facilities because of a fire or a flood, but then it comes back because the community supports it.
Right. Now, if something else happened somewhere else, like the Union Station, we had to rebuild the World War I Museum and Memorial. Yeah. There, everybody's had to rebuild, and everybody has pitched in.
And it happens immediately because everyone pulls together, and I mean, that's something special, and
That's civic pride.
it's civic pride. I think I love going to, if you're flying to Kansas City, you always know the gate because there's a lot of people wearing Kansas City T-shirts. You know, like you don't, people in Omaha or, you know, not to pick on one other state, but Chicago, let's say, you don't see that.
No, you don't.
Right? Like, you know the Kansas City gate because there's a lot of people wearing Charlie Hustle and all the other makers. And
Yeah, and it helps too that everything is, I think in the last probably, I don't know, say 10 years, 15 years, it has really come to the fore, surrounding with a lot of activities here. You know, we had the draft and we're going to have the World Cup and the Chiefs have been winning Super Bowls and the Royals had won a World Series and the whole thing. And it just all has, in the last 15 or so years, it has really come to the fore where now all of a sudden everybody in the country has seen or heard of Kansas City in this place and what is this.
Yeah.
Then they see it on TV, see the parades, they see the draft, they see everything that's happened. I think that gives them a pretty good feeling of what's going on here. Yeah.
Well, then, you know, a silver lining out of the pandemic is everyone started leaving the coast, coming in because they've seen Kansas City. They're like, there's something about Kansas City, and it's a heck of a lot cheaper to live here. So, like, it's pretty nice.
Can always count on that.
Yeah.
Well, continued success to you, your family, the foundation, and just to Kansas City. We are blessed to have you here.
Yeah.
And for everybody to have stayed here and all that you're giving back to your community through the foundation and with the memory of your mom, your dad, and your stepmom, all in the back of everyone's minds. Lindsey Patterson-Smith, thanks so much.
Thanks, Frank.
You bet.
There's Just Something About Kansas City is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission of documenting the stories that have built our city to inspire and educate generations to come. Our work is made possible by the generous support of local partners such as the Cockrell Family Foundation, the Bergman family, and the Sherman Family Foundation. For more information about how you can help us share these stories, visit our website at somethingaboutKC.org. Thank you.